Hello from Prague to the United States of America. Hello, dear students, and welcome back to the course. Although we don't see each other anymore face to face, at least we can see each other like this. I hope you all get home well. I hope that the situation is bearable in the United States. It's quite crazy here in Europe. We're all locked down in our homes. It's a very particular situation. I hope we will get across these hard times. It's really exceptional. But it's also interesting. It's very interesting to observe it from a cultural point of view. We will try to use some of the actual happenings for our course, not too much, because I think we're already focused on it during the whole day, so we will not also focus on it in this course. But we'll speak about it just a little bit. So I know that it's not going to be easy for you to finish this course and finish the whole semester because the happenings have been really stressful and crazy lately. But I hope I will be able to help you as much as I can with this course, and I'm sure that we'll manage to do it all very well. So what do you have to do in this week? I've already posted it online in the announcement. And I've created modules on the Canvas site for you so that you can really check out what you have to do for every week and that you know about it. So this week you should be rethinking a little bit about the readings which we've had so far. So you have one discussion which is in regards to the reading of language and culture. So you have done very well in submitting this summary already for those of you who haven't. So still you have time to submit it. And you can add some comments into our discussion online. Then we have another assignment which will count into the participation, and that is the Google Drive. So you have a collaboration to do there, participation question, and also a question about the national character in terms of America and Czech Republic. So this is the first collaboration we will make on Google, and let's see how it works, and then from there we'll do the next collaborations. And I hope we'll make it successfully until week 14. But this is supposed to be your online lecture for the theme of this week, which is emotions. So I will be going through the presentation that I already posted to you in the announcement before all of this crazy stuff happened. And I'll try to comment on it so that it's not as boring and dry for you to only go through the presentation yourself. Okay, so let's start. What are we going to speak about today? So today we will be speaking about to what extent emotions are similar or different across cultures. We will speak about what is the dimensional approach and the cognitive theory of emotions of Lazarus and Folkman. And of course, the practical exercise, well, we can't do it anymore. You will have to do it on the Google Drive. So you will be pretty surprised here on this slide. I'm saying that actually we still have not defined what emotions really are. We don't have a scientific definition for emotions yet. We know where they are being activated in which part of the brain, which is the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex. I will be speaking about these parts of the brain a little bit. For those of you who study neuroscience, it will not be anything new, I suppose. So we know where in the brain they come up, but we do not know exactly what they are. But of course, everybody knows that emotions exist, and there is still a disagreement on the definition. So this is quite surprising for something such as banal as emotions, right? It's part of our everyday, but we still don't have a clear scientific definition for it. But of course, there has been an outline in history, just like as we discussed in language and in intelligence. Whenever we do a historical outlook, we have to think about the evolution of a theory and of an outlook that we have today. I'm sorry. So let's go on. So the first one who defined emotion somehow was Wilhelm Wundt. So you've heard this name before. He's one of the founders in psychology. And he has actually said that the emotions are something which we can define in terms of the core of experience of feelings. So he basically thought that it's only negative or positive. It's only an emotion is pleasant, unpleasant, tension, relaxation, activity, or passivity. So he was defining it really this way. Today we know that emotions are much more than that only. even if this factor is of course involved. Then we had James and Lange, who have defined changes in the body and psychophysiological processes, which is still very important today when we speak about psychosomatic factors and when we try to understand how emotions possibly could be involved in our bodily changements and then maybe be the cause of some illnesses or sicknesses that we feel. And then, of course, we have other theories, for example, the action readiness theory, cognition, facial expressions, and we will be looking at one particular theory which is involved in emotions today as well, which is the theory of the coping strategies. But before we do that, let's actually look what actually emotions are and how have they been defined. So they have been defined only in the 80s actually, which is quite late. And finally, the scientists could agree on something such as definition about actual emotions. So acceptance of a psychological, they were firstly accepted as a real psychological fact. Emotions actually really exist. And the definition of basic emotions and their blends and mixes was actually finally accepted. And we still are debating whether there is something such as universal emotions. So let's take a look at what we speak about when we speak about emotions. Just a second. So we can't do our participation question as we used to do, but you will have a participation question in your Google Drive. So my question for you was, what are the basic universal emotions if something like that really exists? So which emotions would you say to yourself before you go to the next slide? So here are some of the 6 universal emotions as they have been defined so far, but of course the debate is still ongoing. It's still not really clear whether we can call these 6 emotions really universal, but these ones are the ones that we have defined. So we have joy, sadness, surprise, fear, disgust, and anger. And here you have the particular facial expressions coming with these emotions and the muscles in the face which are involved. And these are supposed to be readable and universal across the globe. Here you have the particular facial expressions which come with these emotions. So try to look at them and define whether really this is the type of face that you make when you feel a particular emotion, and whether it's the same type of facial expressions that you saw when you were here in Czech Republic. And let's see whether you would say that it's something universal or not. Then we have a 7th emotion, and this was defined by probably maybe you know this TV show which was called Lie to Me, and there was Dr. Lightman, I think he was called, who was decoding micro expressions, and he found also this 7th emotion. Well, it was not him, it was actually a real scientist whom we will speak about when we speak about the display rules. We will learn a lot about him. And he is actually the founder of this theory of micro expressions. So these are little expressions which appear only for even shorter than a second on your face, but which really reveal actually the emotions that you actually feel before the display rules come into place and you try to hide the emotion possibly. But the 7th emotion that he defined was the emotion of contempt. Yes, when we are kind of like that about somebody. And here you can see the other micro expressions decoding in terms of all the other 6 emotions that we have spoken about before. So there is big cultural variance in cognitive processes associated with emotions. This is one of the most important things we have spoken about. We will be speaking about emotional components, so what is all involved when we speak about emotions. So there is of course the previous emotions which you have felt in such situations. But then there are also the cognitive processes, the thoughts which an emotion can generate. If you remember a triangle which we were painting and referring to many times, which is behavior, emotion, and thought, well, this is very variant. Connotations and the words that are used to express emotions, of course. Again, if you think about the reading which we had and about the course on language, I already introduced that topic a little bit, that what the biggest variance in terms of languages is in the field of abstract things and also emotions. So I will show you today some emotional specific emotion words in terms of different cultures. And we'll also look into the componential approach in terms of emotion words. So ways of expressing emotions, of course, they're strongly culturally bound. This is the display rules, but we will speak about that in the next course. Let's speak now about the cognitive theory of emotions of Lazarus and Folkman, so the cognitive appraisal theory, which refers to the different coping strategies. And this is something that you have experienced a lot when you were here in the Czech Republic many times. You have experienced that, especially now during the stress situations that you had to face in terms of the situation with the coronavirus, and I think you will experience that even more and more. And you can perfectly watch that when you look at the emotional reactions across the different countries in Europe and how we respond to what's going on right now, actually. So what does this theory say? Cognitive appraisal theory says that we have different ways how we respond to stress situations. So there are two processes involved. One is, of course, the outside input, so it's stress, some kind of stress from the environment. And then what the stress causes inside of us. What is the inside response? And this is where two brain parts are involved. So this is the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex. One will generate an emotional reaction and the other one will generate some kind of cognitive response. It will somehow decode the situation and it will generate a reaction from our side. So it will generate a behavior, but also a thought. So, and this is response of an individual in a cultural context. And of course, it refers to the activated resources, so to the personality that this person has. Now let's look at it a little bit more in depth. You will have a participation question here in your Google Drive. I will come back to it later. But what we are speaking about two stages of cognitive appraisal. So there is the primary appraisal. These are the cognitions. So what does the stressor mean? How does it affect me? When there's some stress situation happening to you, what will you do first? Well, first you will be kind of maybe a little bit shocked or a little bit scared. And then you will start decoding the situation. These are the processes that are going on very quickly and very unconsciously. And you will either interpret it as a threat, as a challenge, or you will interpret it as a harm loss. So meaning that either the situation can be something that will threaten you and your emotional response will be according to that, or either you will perceive it as a challenge and you will try to do the best out of it, which is called problem-solved coping, or you will perceive it as a situation where there could be some harm done to you. So the secondary appraisal then, here we go into the emotions, are the feelings related to dealing with the stressors and the cognitive reactions. Because this is a process, again, we go into the triangle that goes on very, very quickly and very unconsciously. So this is not necessarily something you can control. You can try to learn to control it, and it does help a lot when we are aware of these things that are going on inside of us and when we try to change them a little bit. But when we are really in a stress situation, it's very hard to control these type of reactions. So what I was going to ask you in my participation question was to remember some kind of situation in public transport while you were here in Czech Republic. Because many of you have done field researches in regards to public transportation. You have observed behavior of the people in the public transport. You have tried to see how people react to you while you were in the public transport. And this cognitive appraisal and these coping strategies were going on while you were in the public transport. Even more, they would be going on even more now. If you would be in public transports right now, you cannot go inside there unless you have your mouth and your nose covered. Or you will get a, how do you say that? You will get a verbalization. Yeah, so now the situation is quite different in public transport than what you have experienced previously. But I wanted you to think about situations like that, maybe to share them with your fellow students and say, well, maybe usually what students say is that it happened to them that an old lady came up to them and shouted at them because they didn't give up their seat, the American students, because they don't know that we usually do that here. And then the question is, how do you perceive that situation? You can perceive it as a challenge and try to understand what this lady wants. You can perceive it as a threat and feel threatened by the situation and think that there is something bad going to happen to you, or you can perceive it like somebody wants to do you some kind of harm. And this is really very, very different, very culturally variant, also, of course, dependent on personality and on some cultural factors. And this is what I would like you to think about. So I hope this is clear. If it's not, just let me know. So here, once again, you have the different types of coping strategies. So there is the event, then comes the appraisal, cognitive appraisal, and then comes the response, emotional response. And we have cultures which we call problem-focused cultures and emotion-focused cultures. So cultures that will be more focused on handling problems in terms of trying to understand what to do, and cultures who will be more focused on emotional coping. So now think about Europe and maybe the stereotypes that you know about Europe. Of course, this is not very clear. You can't say that one culture is only like that and the other one is only like that, because again, it's dependent on personality factors. But definitely you can find some of these different type of coping strategies if you observe how Europe is behaving right now, and how the different countries deal with the actual problem and with the real situation of threat, whether they perceive it as a threat or as a challenge. It's very parallel to what is going on right now, and you can observe it. So I hope this is a little bit clear for you, the strategy of coping. If you have any questions, please, I know you can't ask me right now, but you can always email me and I will try to clarify if there are any misunderstandings or something like that. So now let's speak a little bit about the dimensional approach of emotions, because this is something that you will have in the reading of this week. So the reading of this week is not a reading, it's a YouTube video of a professor who is also studying emotions. And she will tell you a lot about this dimensional approach. So how actually individuals experience emotion through a long complex list of various items associated with a different emotion. Again, here we are in linguistic relativity and determinism. And we have to understand the underlying emotions, so filter the emotion words in sets of dimensions to diminish cultural bias. So we're trying actually to decode in an abstract way. We're trying to categorize, actually, something like we did with the fruits and the vegetables. We're trying to do a little bit of the same thing in terms of the abstract field of emotions, because it's very difficult to understand. And here I will show you a little bit. So here you have, just as an introduction, the different emotion words. We have our 6 different emotions, not only the 6 different emotions. Here we have another emotion, like for example, confusion. Yeah, it was not part of the 6 universal emotions, but you can see that confusion can be related to a lot of different type of emotions and different emotion words in English. But if you would go into other languages, you would have maybe a hard time to find parallels for that. And the same thing with strong, with strength. What does it mean to be strong in different cultures? Yeah, you see how abstract this category can be. And I will show you some examples of that right now. So when we speak about the dimensional approach, we evaluate the emotion words in terms of good or bad, in terms of potency, and in terms of activity. So here we are a little bit like Wundt. Yeah, like we spoke about before, the psychologist who was trying to see emotions only in terms of positive, negative, or activity or passivity. This is a little bit what we are trying to do, to decode the different emotion words and give them a little bit of like a filter. And I chose here these 3 words: amazing, weird, and huge. I've already told you about my experience how I learned English when I came into the American culture. And these were some of the words, of the emotion words that I learned that were first on my list when I came to America. And for me, they meant something completely different in a context of Austria or Czech Republic than they meant in the United States. Because we in Europe usually never use words like that. Or when we use them, we really use them in a completely different context. So you would never hear a European saying that he felt a huge emotion, because we simply very few times feel that way. But you Americans feel that very much. Like, you often say that something is huge, you often say that something is amazing. And these are really emotions which are, I would say, very good, very strong, and very active. Yeah, if we evaluate it in terms of emotional components and in terms of potency and activity, I would say these are very strong words, which we never usually use in Europe. And another word was weird. Yeah, so weird is also a word would be very difficult to translate into other languages and to translate all of the factors which lie behind that word. So I tried to explain you a little bit about that approach from my experience. So we're trying to put emotion words into dimensions. This is actually what we're trying to do here in this approach. So it's the connotations of words. It's always very difficult to translate from language to language. You can have an emotion word, but there are a lot of connotations coming with it that are culturally dependent and that are very difficult to understand. What do different words mean in different cultures? Yeah, the dimensions of affective meaning, and Charles Osgood, he has actually provided something as an atlas of affective meaning. So he was trying to decode these emotional words across the globe. And I'll try you, what does he actually evaluate? So for example, anger can have a negative, can be negative in evaluation, high in activation, high in potency. Yeah, the word of fear can be negative in evaluation, high in activation, and low in potency. This is only one example of two different emotional words. And then we're coming to actually the core of this course, which is the culturally unique meaning of emotion words. And here, this is really where it becomes difficult. Oh. So, the culturally unique meanings of emotion words. For example, and you will explore that even more in the reading, but being aggressive in the USA gets actually a positive evaluation. Why is that so? Because in the United States, you value achievement a lot, you value competition a lot, and being aggressive implies being competitive in sports, but does not imply intentional injury to others like it does in other cultures. Yeah, I'm thinking, for example, about the Tibetan culture, if you know. The Tibetans do not value competition at all. So for them, being aggressive would be something which would be evaluated as completely negative. Yeah, so you see really strict cultural differences there in terms of one category of abstract meanings. Let's look at another word. One culturally unique meaning is, for example, black. Yeah, just the word black. Yeah, you've read a little bit maybe about the color interpretations in terms of the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. We've spoken about it a little bit too. So, for example, it's rated as high activity and low potency among Indian students in Delhi because it's associated with the god Krishna and the black hair that this god has. Yeah, whether this would not at all be what we associate with black in our cultures. We would associate it with the lower status of dark skin, which is still a very bad thing to do. So what are culturally specific emotion concepts? They're a little bit different than the componential approach, which we have spoken about so far. There are emotions that are culturally specific, so it means that these emotions cannot be found in any other culture. Pretty amazing, isn't it? So, for example, you have in the island of Tahiti, they do not have a word for sadness. They have other words to express a little bit of a parallel of this type of emotion, but they do not have the word sadness like we have it. So now this is always the question that we have asked ourselves with students. If you don't have a word for a specific emotion in a culture, can you actually feel it? Or you don't feel it actually? That's quite a question, huh? And there is a Japanese word for deserving praise for overcoming a challenge. You know, the Japanese culture is very focused on clear structure and respect for elders, respect for hierarchy. So they do have a word for deserving praise as well. And Eskimos and Chinese do not have a word for anxiety. It's also very interesting. So you can look a little bit deeper into that on this YouTube video in terms of emotion words and language. I think this will be interesting for you to watch. Our language, this is just a reference to the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, just a little repetition, but actually our language structures the way that we express emotions. And here the question, can we experience something if we don't have a word for it? So I often have this feeling like I can only express how I really feel when I speak French, because the French have a lot of this little sensibility for the language and for specific emotions. And sometimes I really just need to speak French in order to be able to express what I really would like to say about how I feel. And I cannot do that in any other language. And many of you have written that in your readings, that you experience the same when you are bilingual, for example, that in one language you can express yourself, but not in the other one. So, yeah, just some examples of culture-specific words. So in Micronesia, fago is the word for compassion, love, and melancholy. Yeah, so quite an interesting mix. Again, emotions that we in the Western cultures would not mix together, because for us they are quite different. Yeah, and if we remember the list of the words that I showed you before, the emotion words, it wouldn't be anything that we would associate in the same category, but they do. Yeah, and the song is the word for justifiable anger, which is morally approved. So I really like this concept of differentiating anger into justifiable anger and just anger, because I think that justifiable anger is something very useful in terms of our emotional awareness, and it can be very healthy to feel something as justifiable anger and to allow oneself to express it if there is a situation of injustice. So I often use this concept, and I say that to patients who are just too nice and who cannot say no and things like that. I always tell them, do you know that there is a concept that says that justifiable anger is a positive emotion and that you should be able to use it? And some other culture-specific words. Now, one of you has spoken about his or her German experience, that when listening to the German language, you always have the impression like the person is saying something mean. So it might be interesting for you to hear that German people have quite specific words in terms of fear. So Angst is a fear without an object to be afraid of, whereas Furcht is being afraid of something, and Schadenfreude is the joy of someone's misery. So it's a very specific word as well. Now questionable and not generalizable, of course. What does it say about the German culture, these words? Yeah, but it's a word that's very difficult to translate into any other language. It's very German specific. Yeah, here you have some other different references to, for example, the different interpretations of the Maslow pyramid. Yeah, so the Maslow pyramid, I guess you are experiencing that again right now very much. I told you that when we spoke about the 3 different generations, that the generation of our grandparents had to live through the war, and they could only care about actually the physiological needs, the safety, and all the other needs were kind of superficial or were not important at that very moment. And I've thought about it. Actually, right now we're kind of finding ourselves in that same situation. We're afraid whether we will still have enough to eat in the supermarket, and we are coming to these basic needs for food, water, and security. And we're actually kind of experiencing what they experienced, and maybe understanding why they could not pay such an emphasis to all the needs that are above the actual basic needs, right? So maybe this also enables us to think about this generational approach. But what I wanted to say here is that, for example, in the French culture, they do not have self-realization as the highest goal, but they call it épanouissement, which is a word which means that you are kind of blossoming, that you are opening yourself up to the world. So I found that quite interesting, just to add you this little French dimension to the top of this pyramid, and to think about whether right now, in the situation like that, where we are locked down and afraid, whether we can think of such a thing as blossoming, right? Quite difficult, isn't it? So here you have just the difference between East and West in terms of the level of needs. Maybe just something to think about. In Asia, we don't speak about épanouissement, but we speak about status. Those of you who have experience with Asian cultures, maybe you would agree with that. there's a little bit of a different definition, that for them the highest thing is not belonging, prestige, and self-actualization like it is for us, because we're very individualistic, but for them it's affiliation to the group, admiration, yeah, because they're very in like that in these cultures, and of course the status, the social status that you can achieve in a particular Asian culture like that. Yeah, if you think of Japan, it's very actual for them. So these were just the different abstract concepts in terms of emotions that I wanted to present to you. And so today, I guess we will conclude on emotions. I will not wear you out anymore. I hope you have enjoyed this little introduction in my little locked up room here. In the next session, in the next week, we will finally speak about what are display rules. I will explain you what this concept actually means and how you can observe it right now in this situation. So if you have any questions, just email me, let me know, and I hope we will finish this week very successfully all together. I wish you all the best and don't give up hope. See you soon.